Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. As always, as you know, what I always start out with is this is my favorite time of the week because it really is. One of the things I get to do with you each and every week here live is to share with you the amazing guests that I have on my show. These people that have come into my life through various different means, through other guests on my show, through people I've met along the way, through books I've read, that have helped me shift my perspective, that give me answers to questions. And a lot of times I wasn't even sure there was a question I needed to ask, but as soon as I met them, I knew that there was a question I needed an answer to, and they were providing it. I love being able to do that with you each and every week live on using my new platform, Restream. And for those of you who are on podcasts, thank you so much. And those in Sweden, thank you so much. You've kept us on top of the charts for almost 2 months now. And I'm so grateful to that. And a new ranking in Croatia and always in the US and in other countries around the world. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Let me know what you're thinking. Share with me some guests you might like to have if there's a guest that stood out for you. I love hearing from you. You are what drives me to do this each and every day. I'm here to support you by asking the questions that you may never get to ask in person of the amazing guests that I have on the show. And with this new platform, you can put a chat question in on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and I can see those. So if you do have a question of my guest and you're watching us live, please note that in the chat and let us know, and I can ask the question live. If you're listening on podcast, reach out on social media to my guest or I, and we can answer whatever questions you have. So let's dive right into it right now. I have an amazing guest on my show today. She just is launching today the book Future Widow, Losing My Husband, Saving My Family, and Finding My Voice. This is a book not just for somebody who's lost somebody. This is a book that I think everybody needs to read because you never know when something may happen in your life and you may experience a loss, or somebody you love may experience a loss. So please welcome to the show, Jenny Lisk. Jenny, thank you.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for having me this morning or this afternoon. No, it's morning your time.
It's morning my time still. Is it still morning your time too, right?
Yes, I'm in Seattle. It's 8 a.m.
Yeah, it's 8 a.m. So thank you for getting up so early.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for writing this book because I know it wasn't easy. I'm still struggling to write the book that I've wanted to write since my mom died 3 years ago. So I get it. I know how hard it is. And this book is beautiful. It is truly beautiful. And you know, I read a lot of books. I mean, I average about 2 books a week.
Wow.
Sometimes more if I want to throw a fiction book in there, just to clear the brain from all of the nonfiction books I read. But this book is a gift. It's truly a gift.
Well, thank you.
When you were writing this book, and by the way, congratulations, you are a #1 new release today. You are a best-selling author. Last time I checked, it was #3, and I know it's going to #1. This book is one of those books that will change people's lives. Okay, so I just want to get that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for saying that because, you know, as an author, it's like, I don't know. I hope it's going to be helpful, right? That's the idea. But you don't really know until you start hearing from people. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I've been through a lot of loss in my life. I mean, my brother, my dad, my mom, just those are the immediate people, you know, other than grandparents and things like that. And have gone through a lot of sort of, I'll call it preemptive anticipatory grief, knowing that somebody I love is going to go soon kind of thing. But the way that you wrote this made it so approachable. And I know you've got, as we can see on the screen, you've got a podcast as well called the Widow Parent Podcast, in addition to your book, Future Widow, that releases today. What drove you to and I know it's in the book, but I'd like my listeners to hear it from your mouth, okay, from your heart. What drove you to say, I need to write this? Because this is not a brain book. This is a book from your heart.
Mm.
This is the hardest and easiest to write.
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting point. Hardest and easiest, because in terms of like, it doesn't need research as certain types of nonfiction books that are very research heavy, right? So that task is eliminated. But yeah, writing, sharing your story. When I was going through the 8 months when my husband was sick, and he had brain cancer and ultimately died. Actually, 5 years ago this week, it'll be Friday. It'll be 5 years. Uh, he was sick for 8 months, and we had these two small kids. They were 9 and 11. And I felt really lost as a parent. Like, how do I guide them through this? And I just, I didn't want anybody, if I could help it, to feel lost the way I did. And I felt like if I shared my story, maybe I could help somebody. And that was one of my biggest questions throughout this. I had this first draft, and I went to my editor and I said, okay, it's ready for editing. But first, like, tell me, should I just throw this whole thing in the trash? Like, is this actually going to help anyone? Like, should we even take step 2 here, right? And because if you look at this and you tell me it's not going to help anyone, then maybe I'll just, you know, toss it out and say move on. And she's like, oh my gosh, no, this is definitely going to be helpful to people. And so it's a very long and rambling way of answering your question. But I felt like, I had written this Bridge journal when he was sick, and there was quite a bit of writing there already as a starting point. And I felt like there's got to be something here that would be helpful to others who haven't yet been through this journey, who may be supporting friends who are going through the journey, who may find themselves in this place, now or later, that it seemed like it would be helpful to other people like myself if I could share my story.
You mentioned the Bridge journal, and a lot of people don't know what that is. So can we just throw that out there so people aren't like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bridge is, well, it's a website. It's essentially a blog. It's a free service. And it's very popular when someone has some kind of crisis, maybe a medical crisis, a death, someone who has well, in our case, a medical crisis, that we wanted to share updates with the people, the family, the friends, the people who were following us. And, it's kind of funny because originally I thought, someone suggested, my sister actually said, you should create, maybe you should make a Caring Bridge. And I was like, no. Like, I'll just send some updates by text, and I'll send a few emails, and, some people can pass the word around. It'll be fine. And pretty quickly it became obvious that we had a lot of people who really cared about us and what was going on, and wanted to know, excuse me, and be in the loop. And so it was on the day of his first surgery that we're all sitting around the waiting room at the hospital, and my sister started the Caring Bridge site and then handed it over to me, and I took over posting from there. But it was a great way to share, sometimes posting every single day, sometimes it became less frequent depending on what was happening. Both, it's interesting because it started out as kind of matter-of-fact updates. He had surgery, he's out of surgery, maybe he's coming home this day, things like that. And later then became more me reflecting on things as we were living them. But anyway, it's an online blog, and I'd encourage anybody who is going through some kind of a crisis where you're needing to get updates out to your community, to consider starting a Caring Bridge thing, because it is free and it's simple to set up and to add posts and updates.
There's so much more to that, though, and it really struck me in your book about that. And even when you were just talking now, I remember going through when my dad was in the hospital after he had broken his neck. He had Parkinson's, and everybody wanted to know what was going on. And I'm trying to be present for my dad. And when my mom had open heart surgery, and my now ex-husband, and all these things. It's like everybody wants to know. And and in my case, I didn't have anybody else that could take on that role.
Mm.
At one point, when my ex-husband was having open heart surgery, my dear friend Susanna, she said, let me take on the role of keeping everybody updated.
Mm.
And it was such a relief for me to know that I didn't have to answer every single text, every single call that came in, come home and find 30 billion, what felt like 30 billion messages on my answering machine or an email, people wanting to know. And they have good hearts, they want to know. But when you're going through it, it takes every bit of effort to just focus on being the advocate for the person in the hospital, trying to take care of yourself, in your case, taking care of your children as well, and in the middle of a home remodel that needed to happen at the same time. That is not an easy thing, but yet it saying to yourself, okay, there's got to be another way that I can keep people updated and keep myself sane.
Mm.
That was a huge step
Mm.
in the process. Can you talk about that some more?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've been on the other end of several caring bridges. Other people have gone through things, and um, I'll say people can do it different ways. Sometimes people will deputize a family member or a close friend to be the one to
Right.
make the updates. In my case, it was important to me to be the one making the updates.
Mhm.
I wanted to share directly with the people who were supporting us what was going on.
Right.
Um, and like I said, what was going on both on the factual event level and also on the, letting people in a bit and sharing kind
Right.
of what was going on with us behind the scenes or what I was reflecting on things. Um, no, I've lost sight of what your question was. I'm sorry.
Well, it's just this, what people don't realize is how much is involved with
Mm,
caregiving,
yeah.
with the immediate crisis, with a long drawn out crisis, and how sometimes you need to deputize somebody.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean that you don't want to keep them updated yourself. I mean, I had people get mad at me because they didn't hear it from me directly.
mm,
You know, I
yeah.
was like, well, I'm sorry, excuse me. I was in the hospital trying to keep my mother alive, not knowing if she's going to die. And you're pissed off because I didn't literally pick up the phone and call you. I had somebody call you
Right.
who happened to be there the moment I was taking my mother to the hospital
Right.
and said, we'll call everybody.
Right. 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 Yeah.
So you get this when you're going through something, you get people that don't seem to understand.
Mm,
But they're processing in their own way, right? Right, Jenny?
sure.
They're
Sure.
they're upset too, and they don't know how to express it.
Sure. And in our case, I think, I mean, this was a parent, a dad in our school community, friend community, family community, a 43 when he got sick, 44 when he died year old person. And I think a lot of we were shocked, but a lot of people were shocked. And I think that there's a little bit of processing of like, if this could happen to this family, maybe this could happen to anyone, right? So there's
Right.
that element too. And it was important to me to share. Well, first of all, I had 8 months to share, right? It wasn't like I was trying to compress all of this um, activity into, a couple of days or a week of a crisis, right? I had 8 months to think about it, and I had time, going, sitting around the hospital waiting and things like that. But part of what I wanted to do was to get the elephant out of the room a little bit and to share with people. I mean, I didn't want people to just be like, all they knew was her husband has cancer, or
Mhm.
maybe her husband has a, terrible cancer that doesn't have any recovery. Um, but then big elephant, like, what do I say, or should I say something, or should I not? Or if I bump into her, what do I do? Or, all these kind of things. And I felt like by sharing, this is what's happening, here's what's going on, here's some of my current thoughts, that I could kind of get that elephant, so to speak, a little bit out of the room and try to, um, hmm, I don't know. It just the communication. I didn't want to bump into people and have it be awkward for me either, right? And
Right.
and by communicating, it got some of that out of the way a little bit.
Yeah, I think it lessens some of that. Somebody saying to you, "So, what are you and Dennis up to?"
Yeah. Well, there's that. Yeah. Oh, how are things? Uh,
And then it's just like, "Oh, wait, somebody doesn't know," and it
right.
hits you, and you have to
Right.
decide in a dime. And you talked about this beautifully in your book, how you went through this mental acrobatic, shall we say, of how do I answer that?
Well, yeah. So that I should say, even despite sharing as much as I could, still that question, "How are you?" I mean, every time I got the question, it would just cause fits of uncertainty. And in my mind, I'd be like, okay, how do I answer this? First of all, who's asking? How much do they know? Even though I shared all these things, I didn't know how many people were reading every single word of Karen Bridge, how many people were maybe getting the highlights, how many people maybe just knew that my husband had cancer and there was a crisis going on, but they didn't know the details. So, part of it is like, who's asking? What do they already know? What kind of are they asking? How are you? Like, hey, how are you? Or are they asking, really like, how are you? Like, I'm up on the latest and this and this and this, and now wanting to know some nuanced detail, right? And yeah, as I say in the book you referred to, usually I'd cycle through all these questions in my head in the span of about a half a second and end up saying, fine, right? Which wasn't really true at all, but you
The
know,
infamous "fine."
right?
Just leave me alone. I don't want to go into it. I'm fine.
Which wasn't a good answer, for me or for them. But it took me a really long time, even after he died, to be able. And sometimes that question is just an offhanded, almost like a greeting, right?
Right.
Hello, good morning, good to see you today. How are you? And then it's not really a how are you. It's just like a hello, basically,
Right.
right? And to be able to, eventually I could receive that as sometimes just a hello question and be like, hey, good, how are you? Right? But there was a long period of time when no way.
You talked about a different question that seemed to help more, which is how are you today? And I
Mm,
know that for me, my good friends would ask me that.
mm. And I didn't make that up. I should give credit to Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook. And the interesting thing is that her husband died just before my husband got sick. A few weeks, right? So I had seen in the news, oh, Sheryl Sandberg, her husband died. This is terrible. She has these kids. How sad, right?
Right.
But at that point, it was more of a news event of a prominent person, and you feel for them. But it didn't have any personal tie, right? But
Right.
just a few weeks later, now I'm like, okay, my husband's got brain cancer. We're having surgery. I've got two kids about the same age as her kids, and I better pay attention to her story because this is probably going to be me down the road. And she was sharing um, some really great posts at the time about
They
her
were beautiful.
experience. Yeah. And she actually had a post about kicking the elephant out of the room. And I think that some of that helped encourage me to be open about, sharing things. I figure, if she could share with the whole entire world, I could share with my corner of the world. But one of her early posts, she talked about the question, "How are you today?" being really much more helpful. And when I read that, I said, "Yes, she's
Yeah.
absolutely right," because it feels like "How are you?" is such a global question, and like I said, there's so many ways you could take it and go with it and whatever. Um, even like, how am I like right this second, or how am I on an
Oh, yeah.
existential level, right?
Yeah.
But how are you today narrows it down, and it just becomes so much more feasible, I think, to answer.
Well, I think it also gives permission for you to be okay or not okay in this moment.
Mm,
And in the next moment, be the opposite.
right.
I
Right.
mean, it gives you permission to grieve in whatever way you need to. And it might not even be grieving. It could just be something happened with the kids, something happened at work, something happened for yourself. I mean,
Right.
little things like you went to put pants on and you ripped them as you put them on. And then that did happen to me. But it just was like that straw that breaks the camel's back when you're going through long-term caregiving of any kind. It's something that could be completely unrelated that just throws you for a loop.
Mhm. Yeah.
When you wrote this book, I get the feeling, and you talked about it throughout the book, but when you wrote it, I got the feeling that you were saying to the world, to your readers, just really to the world, that, you know what, we're not talking about this enough. We're not talking about the caregivers enough. We're not talking about the loss. And there's not enough easy answers out there. I mean, with Google at your fingertips, I find that there's a couple of things about grief that are always out there, but not somebody willing to share the journey and ask the questions, which is why I really wanted you on the show, other than the fact that our mutual editor, Jocelyn Carbonara, our dear friend, said, you have to have her on the show. You must read her book. It really, you talk about, finding your voice. I feel like that this book helps just help others find a voice too. Like, you don't even know the questions to ask, Jenny.
Mm.
And they're hard to find.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't even know what the question is in that, other than, to me, having questions is something critical to who I am, right? But sometimes you don't have a question. You just need an answer, but you don't know what to ask. I feel like in here, there's a lot of answers to questions you didn't even know you should ask.
Hmm.
Does that make
Well,
sense?
that's interesting. Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting observation. It's great to hear, what you, as a person not connected to the story, reading this for the first time through this text, right? Like what your reactions are and how you interpret it. Yeah. You mentioned that grief, there's not enough discussion about it. And I agree with that. And the interesting thing is, as we record this, we're in a global pandemic, obviously.
Right.
Grief is all of a sudden on a lot more people's minds.
Yeah.
It's being talked about more. It's touching more people. I mean, it always touches a certain number of people every day, week, month, year, right? Because we all die at some point, and so everyone's going to encounter this. And it's just more now, And so it is, I think that, the more dialogue we can have about it and not keep it hidden and untalked about, and, the more we can support each other, and those of us who've been through this, maybe the circumstances differ, right? My husband didn't die during a pandemic. So there are some differences, but there's so much similar as well. Um, and if we can share our stories and learn from each other, then I think that's a good thing.
There's a lot more to grief than just the person passing away, though. I mean, that's how a lot of people think of grief, is this person died. But your children had the grief of the loss of their dad doing stuff with them. You lost this partner who assisted you through all areas of your life. Your job shifted and changed as a result of everything. The way you were with your children changed. So there was a grief around that and a worry in your mind about, well, I need to be strong for them. I need to do for them. When you were going through it, did you think, and I know you have your caring in here, there's beautiful Caring Bridge, your actual posts or paraphrase posts that you wrote in here, in addition to further explanation. Can everybody tell that I really love this book, and I think it's really, really important?
Thank
It's
you.
such it's really a legacy book. So,
Thank you.
brought my tissues just in case.
I didn't prepare. I don't think I have tissues. I got my shirt. I can.
So when you think about grief, how do you think about grief?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. You're absolutely right that it is multifaceted, and some people call what you're referring to invisible losses. I mean, the obvious thing that you can see is this person was here today and they're gone tomorrow, or whatever. But it is all of those invisible losses that maybe you don't think about. The loss of your imagined future is an interesting one, right? Like,
Right.
none of us know how exactly our futures are going to turn out, but if you have a situation so far where you've been married to someone for 17 years and you have two kids and they're 9 and they're 11 and you both have jobs and you have a busy life and you kind of have some broad ideas, maybe this will unfold and the kids will grow up and then maybe we'll, someday retire, maybe we'll live here or here, maybe we'll travel here or here. You don't know the details, but you kind of, your future in your mind has already unfolded in maybe some certain broad, swaths of a path. And one of the things then when something like this, when that spouse dies, is like that whole future that I imagined, which of course hasn't happened yet, so I didn't actually lose it. But in my mind, I was expecting it to unfold a certain way, approximately,
Right.
has gone. And so then you're grieving the loss of that imagined or expected future as well, which is something that I'm sure I never would have known about or thought about until I had gone through this. You think, like you said, someone dies and you lose that person. And
Right.
that is um, one big part of it. And there are so many other parts as well.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me, when I knew my mom was eventually going to die, and that it was going to come sooner rather than later, but it still hit me like a lead balloon. And in your book, you talk about asking your husband to write letters.
Mm. Hmm.
I remember doing that, right? But what if we all thought about that you could just die tomorrow? What
Mm.
would you want to say?
Yeah.
There are so many beautiful ideas in here that sadly you needed to learn almost too late
Mm.
for a lot of things. So, what would you say to somebody today that really doesn't even know that tomorrow could be somebody they love's last day, right? What would be the things that you would say to them you wish that they would do?
Mm.
And I'm going
Well,
to take a tissue now.
specifically just on the letters piece, as you're speaking, I'm realizing I should probably like reread my own book and learn that as a lesson myself. Like, why haven't I sat down since then and written letters to my kids? I probably should, right? Maybe I should write them a letter on their birthday and tuck it away somewhere, or once a year or whatever, right? Like, and this is just like on the concrete level. Um, because as you were speaking, I was thinking, so yeah, I asked my husband to write some letters to the kids, and wouldn't it be great if they had letters that he had already written in past years, just before he
Right.
was sick, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, well, they could have letters from me now and they don't. Like, I should do that. I think I'm gonna write that down after we get off this call and do that. Uh, but as far as, and one of the things that I think I learned from this, you're talking about people who, maybe aren't thinking about the fact that it's the proverbial run over by a bus, right? We could all die tomorrow. We won't. right? But theoretically we could, and we don't know when that's going to be. One of my big conclusions was that Dennis got kind of half of a life, right? I mean, 44, so just, rough figures, half a life.
Right.
If I live the rest of my life kind of halfway, like, I think that's kind of gonna add to the tragedy, right? I feel it's increasing my motivation to make the most of whatever time I have, because I don't know how much time I'll have, and it's already a tragedy that he died, right? And so if I just kind of go through the motions and live out the next half of my life, I think that'll be, well, I won't be satisfied with that, you know? And I think that's one of the things that I've learned from this is, yeah, our time is limited. So let's make the most of it while we can.
And that's when you decided to start your Widowed Parent podcast and the Write the Future Widow book, because you needed to make sure. I mean, we're both geeks, right? We both come from the tech world. And we also, by the way, have a similarity in Yonkers, New York. I grew up in the Bronx in Yonkers, New York. When I read through the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, how come we've never, there were so many instances of where we kind of crossed paths in places and in careers and different things like that. You made these choices because of what happened to Dennis. I hate the what if game, but I'm going to play it here, okay? Because I think it's a helpful lesson, and I'm sure my listeners are probably thinking some of this. You were on a certain path. Dennis's passing didn't just bring you to a crossroads. It brought you to like a wall of reevaluating everything in your life. Was there one moment, one question, and I know this question's in the book, and I think it's an absolutely beautiful question as I'm rubbing your book. Was there something that somebody asked you or you asked yourself that made you think, yeah, this is what I need to be doing with my life next because of something?
I'm trying to guess which question you're asking about.
Well, I can tell the question, right? It's if my life is the same 5 years from now as it is today, would I be okay with that?
Right.
But I feel like there's more to it than that.
Well, but I think and I thought that might have been the one you were thinking of. And the rest of the thought is, okay, if my life is the same 5 years from now as it is today, would I be okay with that? And if the answer is no, or especially if the answer is hell no, then now is the time to start doing something about that. And it's, to me, it's a way of thinking even about like taking action or starting to take that first step, because it's easy to get, for me at least, to get paralyzed, right? Like, well, maybe I should, change something or whatever, but it's, inertia sets in, right? It's easy to, well, maybe I'll change something tomorrow or next year or whatever, or maybe I'll take a step, but to me, clarifying that question, like to say, okay, imagine my life in 5 years. Am I going to be satisfied? Am I going to be happy with where I am, with my life, with whatever's happening, if it's the same as right now? That's the first part of the clarifying question, right? And because it's easier to think, future me, 5 years from now, me, like it's easy to think, oh, well, maybe I'm not satisfied with X or Y or Z right now, but in the future, everything will be fine. Well, how are we going to get to that point where there's some unknown future point where things are fine, whatever fine means, right? Whatever it means to you. If I don't take any action, it's not like something's magically going to happen to just make everything somehow better in X amount of time. And so thinking about it's not unreasonable to think if I want something to be different in 5 years, if I start doing something now, that I could work towards that, right? And then if I
Right.
don't start doing something now, then probably things won't be magically different in 5 years or however many years is in your time horizon. And so to me, that really clarified the thinking of like, yeah, I want things to be different in 5 years, so I'm going to do something now. And then the question is narrowed down to, okay, well, what am I going to do? What's that first thing and that second thing and
Right.
the third thing, as opposed to this more global, question that's harder to maybe get your hands around.
I think it's a question as to whether you have loss or not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, it's okay. I mean, I'll give you a really weird example, Jenny, right?
Mm-hmm.
A week before I don't know if it was my 25th or 30th high school reunion, I got braces.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because I'd been complaining about how my teeth were shifting. I was having physical repercussions, and I had had braces when I was a little kid. And my mother was still alive at that point, and she said, "Are you sure you want to do this right before your birthday and right before this reunion where you are going to be speaking? And you
Uh-huh.
haven't seen your high school friends in forever."
Yeah.
And I was just like, you know what? I don't want to be complaining about this 2
Mm.
years from now.
Mm.
So I'm just going to do it now because something's going to come up where I'm going to have to be on a stage somewhere. This is obviously pre-COVID, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
When we were
Mm-hmm.
all doing these kind of things. And I bit the bullet and I did it, and it made a massive difference for me.
Hmm.
In terms of, it changed some physical stuff that was going on, and I was just like, hey, I got braces, who the hell cares?
Uh-huh.
It wasn't like it was when I was a little kid and everybody talked about the headgear and all of that stuff. So these kind of questions are so important, but while you're going through a crisis, it seems very hard to, from experience, make decisions and to make changes. I mean, you were able to go through a nest and rearrange your house. Well, you had to deal with the whole fact that your kitchen was completely torn apart and you had
Hmm.
amazing people to help you with it. But I you seem to be able to work through the grief in a way that took you to an amazing place. I know there are listeners out there, Jenny, that have had losses that can't get there. What do you say to them?
Mm. Well, that's an interesting question. Um, I guess my thought, I mean, it might maybe depend on where they are in the grief process, right? And at some points, somebody who's early on in grief, they're probably not going to be thinking about creating new futures. They're thinking about getting through day to day or hour to hour. But I guess at some point to think about the fact that, I thought about the fact that I had to create what my next steps would look like, right? My future,
Right.
like that, as much as I, would want to go back and take a magic wand and erase what happened and change the outcome and all these things. The fact is, once he died, there was no undoing the fact that he died, right? Much as you could want it to be different and everything else, no matter what you do, you can't undo that. So, what is the next half of my life going to look like? And I think taking that shift to like recognize that I had to choose and I got to choose, right? What the next part of my life would look like. And that if I didn't choose, I would just muddle along for the next few decades, hopefully, a bunch of decades.
Right.
Muddle along, and then someday my own life will be over, and realizing that I didn't want to muddle along for 50 more years, but that I wanted to create for myself what my life would look like. And so I guess in terms of, but it's a fine line, because you can't talk to someone whose spouse or whose somebody has just died and be like, okay, now create your future, right? It's like it's a process. You have to get there. But sometimes I think about Viktor Frankl and his Man's Search for Meaning, and he
Right.
talks about how, for people who haven't read his book, he was in a concentration camp in World War II, and he talked about how he couldn't choose his circumstances at all. Of course, he was completely, captive of everything, but he could choose how he responded.
Right.
That was the essential freedom that he maintained. He didn't have any freedom over himself, and the fact that he was in the camp, and the fact that he was on the receiving ends of all kinds of torture and all kinds of, terrible circumstances.
Right.
He couldn't choose any of those circumstances or change any of them. But he retained the right, or, the essential, the freedom to choose how he would respond to those circumstances. And so sometimes I think about that here, right? I can't change the fact that he died. I can't change the fact that my kids lost their dad. There's so many things I can't change. What I can affect is how I respond now. And I think that's a point that's, it's been helpful to me to get to that point, to then think about how do I move forward.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, Jenny. I mean, the whole idea of how am I going to respond? What popped into my head was this additional thought, which I think you said without really saying, which is responding today, sort of going back to the how am I today? Well, today I can respond this way, and I can see this possible future. An hour from now or tomorrow, maybe I just need to be quiet and not push through or not do something.
Sure.
But tomorrow I'm going to pick right back up, or in the next hour. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I kind of heard that throughout our conversation today and throughout your book. It's got a lot of dog ears to it.
Good.
Yeah, and not only dog ears for prepping for the show, but also dog ears because there are so many moments in the book that are just gems and treasures. So is that really kind of what goes on for you, that you say to your listeners of the Widowed Parent podcast and the readers of the book that, you're constantly choosing how you're responding? Or is it a one-time thing?
Oh, no. I mean, I think this depends like what level you're talking about, right? Like maybe on the bigger directional questions, like I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to write this book. I mean, you kind of choose those. Well, I was going to say, you don't exactly choose them once. I mean, you initially choose them once, right? But then you have to kind of continue committing to be on that path, right? But then day in and day out, there's all kinds of, it's not like it's a linear path, right? And you also, I mean, so not only are you choosing the next steps to get to that goal, right? But also there can be setbacks, there can be directional changes. There were even times when I was writing the book, even though, okay, I decided I'm going to write the book. I can't tell you how many times I was like, maybe I should just throw the whole thing out and, I don't know, do something else, right? And I think I mentioned in the beginning that one of the first times is when I went to my editor and said, should we even go to the next step and do the editing here, right?
Right.
But other times too, even more recently, even oh my gosh, last week, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do this, right?
And now you're a #1 best-selling author.
I know, right? And
You're changing people's lives because they're reading your book.
well, at some point in the last few days, it became, well, even if I wanted to back out now, it's too late, right? Because balls are in motion on Amazon and the printers and everything. But even, last fall, I went through a phase where I was like, seriously, maybe I should pull the plug on the whole thing. And I had done all the writing, all the rewriting, all the editing, had, engaged some people to do some early reading and stuff. And I got to tell you, I had to binge listen to Brene Brown to get comfortable with vulnerability. Like I realized, I'm like, oh my God, memoir. I think I hate memoir. It feels so exposed, right? Now, you might think, as somebody who's writing a memoir, that maybe I would have thought of this a while ago.
I didn't when I wrote mine. I mean, it was there, but it's not there.
Yeah. Well, right. And even though I, of course, knew that a memoir is sharing my story, and of course I'd been writing my story and sharing it and so forth, there's still something about getting closer to it being real that kind of brings it into focus. Is like, whoa, right? Like, now this is really real, and do I really, and so I decided that, well, I had two solutions. One was seriously, I'm not joking when I say I binge listened to Brene Brown. I went on Audible and I downloaded, I think it was Daring Greatly.
Oh, that's a beautiful book.
That one. Yeah. And I listened, and I don't know how many hours that was. And I just listened to the whole thing in a day. Like, I just seriously, because I was like, I really had to get comfortable with this. And then I also listened to a few of her other talks, TED Talks, and, other speeches and stuff. And then I have a writing accountability partner that we've been meeting every week, and which has been terrific and in so many respects. And in this case, I had this, my weekly meeting with her, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this, and she was like, okay, seriously? And she's like, okay, this book is going to help so many people. Right. And so she kind of helped talk me down. In fact, I think I put in the acknowledgments thanking her for talking me down more than once when I was like, maybe I should throw the whole thing in the trash. And
you did mention her. When I read the book, I read everything. I love reading the acknowledgments.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I don't know what question you asked that got me started on that, but it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah. This whole idea of, some people go, well, you made a choice and that's it. You made it once and you're good to go. But it's not really it. When you eloquently put it, it's a constant choosing of it. And some days it's a little harder to choose to move forward, to clean up somebody's bed if you're a caregiver, because, you just can't afford help, or you can't get help right now from somebody. And you're having to do it all your own, and it feels overwhelming. And in that moment, you may be like, I can't do this anymore. But it is about choosing and choosing again and choosing again. And maybe the fifth time you choose, it looks slightly different. Maybe it's, you do go to the diapers instead of not having somebody wear diapers. I use it as an extreme example, but it is something that somebody I know recently lost a parent, and the father did not want to have diapers on his wife. And he wouldn't allow caregivers to come in. He wanted the kids to do it all. And it's traumatized them to see their mother this way. But yet for other people, that is something they couldn't imagine not doing. So I think it's like choices that you have to make that's right for you. You can't go with what might be right for somebody else.
Right.
So when you were going through this 8 months of losing your husband piece by piece, losing this future that you saw, watching your children lose what they were losing, did you think about the choices you were making in terms of what other people were saying to you? Because I know you got a lot of advice. I know you had to have gotten a lot of advice from a lot of other people. What did you ask yourself? What were you thinking about to help you find that what was right for you and your family? Even if it went against what doctors or other people were saying.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And it's a hard one because, I mean, when you've got this period of time and I had never encountered a medical crisis like this, and it's a whole new area of things to learn. And, some of it is you don't know what you don't know. I tried to find some advice where I could and then see how, what's the word I'm looking for? See how that felt, I guess, see what worked for me. And, I had a few friends who had some experience with some of this. And so I would, try to ask them stuff and then think about how what they said, did or didn't apply to my situations. It's, and some of it is when you're going through, and especially in the early days, weeks, months, we had so much, I called it in the book, activity being like crisis activity, where sometimes you don't, like, you're just kind of trying to go like, what's the next thing that has to happen? What's the next thing that has to happen? Right. Like now you're going to the ER and now you have another surgery and now you have this problem and now you got to call this other specialist and now you have to do this other thing. And so in some of that, it's some of the decision making maybe becomes a little, I don't know, easier is not the word, but it simplifies the decision making sometimes if you're thinking about like the next step and you're narrowing your sphere of possibilities to like what's happening next, as opposed to thinking about a more global question. But one of the, in some respects, and particularly as it comes to thinking about like children's grief and how does all that part play out, I could almost argue that I didn't have enough advice. Like, at one point later in the 8 months, we did engage someone from Safe Crossings, which is a group here affiliated with our hospice, but they don't just work with hospice families. They work with all kids in King County who have lost a parent or a sibling, and they will start, if in case of a terminal illness, they will start before the person actually dies.
Okay.
And so that was helpful. But I wish I had known about that and started with them sooner. And this is part of what brings me back to, the book and reflecting on what I wish I had known or done differently. If I had maybe had more advice from a children's grief expert or something, I would have maybe had more to consider and feel more informed as I was thinking about some of the parenting stuff throughout. So, yeah, that was a long and rambling way of maybe partially answering what you asked.
It wasn't long and rambling. And it's like I had said earlier in the show, the book gives answers to questions you didn't even know you needed to be thinking about way before you possibly need to be thinking about it. Like you said, you didn't know that there were resources out there to perhaps help your children through what they would be going through as they lose a parent, as they watch a parent pass. I wish I had known while I was taking care of my mom for 6 years and I was working with a therapist, but it's different. I would have had different conversations with them about stuff that was going on. So it's a beautiful thing to say, here's what I learned. I pray it helps you.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things about memoir, right? Is you can read this person's story and this person's story and this person's story, and then you can pick and choose like which parts are relevant to you, which parts speak to you, which parts don't. And that's one of the things I do with the podcast. Some of the discussions are other widowed parents sharing their stories, and I think it's helpful because no two situations are exactly alike. But as listeners hear many different people's stories and circumstances and why they did or didn't approach things this or that way, I think they can use that, first of all, to not feel so alone, and secondly, to take the lessons that they want to, or they can, or that are applicable out of other people's stories and apply it to whatever it is they're dealing with. And I think that's, so that's part of the podcast. But then in the case of the book, right? I mean, here's my memoir, and here's any particular person who reads it might take certain things out of it, and then they might read other memoirs and take certain other things out of those, and maybe make a composite, in a kind of a composite fashion. It might help them increase their understanding or their thought process about next steps or whatever it may be. And so I guess I think that's maybe one of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, benefits isn't the right word, but benefits of memoir as a genre, of what the readers can take out of the experience.
And that's one of the benefits to podcasting and what we're doing here. We've had a chance to look at some of the comments, but everyone should listen to this on so many levels. Neil wrote, Joe wrote, "This conversation alone has allowed me to give myself permission to make some difficult decisions." I mean, thank you for agreeing to come on the show and share your story and help others through your story and the work that you're doing. I read this book in one sitting while I was waiting for my car to be repaired. And I'm sitting there and the tears are coming because it put me in a space of healing and processing some of the stuff that still had not been processed from a lot of grief over a long, long time. I've not lost a husband. I don't have children, but the messages, the story really applies. The questions, the answers, these are all things we will all at some point on some level or some version deal with loss. Deal with grief of some kind. And this is a beautiful tribute to you, to your husband, Dennis, and to your children and your family. So
thank you.
As we are getting ready to close the show, number one, where can people get the book, find out about your podcast, The Widowed Parent, and reach out to you?
Yeah, well, the book is available for sale everywhere: Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, a bunch of digital platforms. I've got all the links on page futurewidowbook.com. So wherever somebody prefers to buy books, they can find all the links there, as well as a description and some information and a link back to my website. So it's futurewidowbook.com. And I should say, I haven't even announced this yet. I'm going to put it on social media later today, but because this book is so much about giving back, I wanted to do something for launch week to give back. And I'm doing a BOGO offer, which in this case is buy one, give one. And so I set up a thing. Anybody who buys the book anywhere, paperback, ebook, Amazon, anywhere else, can go to jennylisk.com/BOGO, JENNYLISK.com/BOGO. And I just got a real short form there, and people can fill it out and send in, their Amazon receipt or their whatever. And I'll send a link for a free ebook download, because I really want that they can give to a friend. And the idea is to try to get the book into as many people's hands as possible, and they can think about, hey, I read it and I really think my friend so-and-so would like this, and give them a free copy as a thank you for buying it during launch week. So again, it's jennylisk.com/BOGO. And the podcast is at widowedparentpodcast.com.
That's great. And you said this is during launch week, the offer. So normally I don't say the dates and stuff. So it's the week of January 5th, 2021.
Right. Through Sunday. So through the 10th.
Through the 10th. Okay.
Yep.
So if you're listening to this live or you're listening to this on the podcast, and this is a great time to buy the book. and to give one to somebody else who could really be helped by it. So it's futurewidowbook.com will list all the different places you can buy the book. And then after you've bought it, go to jennylisk.com/BOGO to fill out the form to send the ebook to somebody else. And I'll have those posted as well all around my social media and on the blog post as well when I write this up. So last thought you want to leave my listeners with, Jenny?
Oh, that's a good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I hope that people will read the book and will take something away from it. And thank you for saying that you found it interesting as someone who is a different situation from mine, not being a widowed parent. I do think that it is broader than that audience, and it's good to hear, from you that seems to be the case. So thank you very much. And I hope that if you know somebody who is a widowed parent, that you'll send them to the podcast. I don't mean you, I mean people who are listening. And there's some resources there too, like how to write a condolence card that anybody might find useful. So just thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it was a joy to have you, Jenny, and I only needed to use the tissues once, but there were a couple times I thought I was going to need them even more. So, but that's the beauty of it, right? I mean, not even just this show. I've cried on other shows, other episodes that have nothing to do with topics like your book discusses. It's being vulnerable, it's being honest, and I want to thank you for your vulnerability, for the love you have for your family and yourself that enabled you to write this book. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Now, everybody, this book is available wherever books are sold, Future Widow. I highly encourage you to get it no matter what your situation. Give it to somebody you know, somebody that you love. It doesn't matter if you're married, have children or not. I think this book is a useful book for life for everybody because it answers questions, as I said, that you probably didn't even know you had the question for. So I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for everybody that was commenting on social media. Jenny Lisk for being on the show today. And remember, everybody, at the end of the day, the right questions can change your life. So what are you asking today? Have a great day, everyone.